Next up for Leicester, it's a nice trivial game at the Emirates where we always win, right? Maybe not. Let's have a look at Arsenal versus Leicester. This is the match preview. Welcome to the Fox 8 TV. Hello everyone. After the exciting, thrilling penalty victories against League 2 Walsall, we have a nice easy task ahead of us. It's Arsenal at the Emirates. One of the toughest games we will definitely play this season. This one could be a rough one. Let's take a look at what the match has got in store and how we might get a result if we can cling on to something. Let's look at the table. Leicester are in a mighty 15th position, despite not beating Everton, who were bottom of the table last week. It's as you were. Draws at Ipswich and Southampton. Palace drew at Man United. Our draw at Everton. It's as you were. And Wolverhampton Wanderers are the new team at the bottom. However, all these teams are very close to one another. If we lose, we might well be in the bottom three. If we win, could put some space between some of us and the teams below us. So next few weeks is absolutely vital. At the other end of the table, Arsenal are currently sitting in 4th position, but they're unlucky. They were literally seconds away from getting a famous win at the Etihad. That would have put them top instead of Man City. That was a performance that almost looked like the performance of champions. They didn't quite get the win, but the draw still might be really valuable to them in the future. And I've got a feeling that it's going to be either them or Man City that wins the title at the end of the season. Shock horror, I know. Right, let's take a look at Mr. Lego haircut himself, Mikel Arteta. He's been in charge of Arsenal now for quite a few years. Kind of surprising. He's actually one of the longest serving managers in the Premier League now. And you have to say he's done a really good job with them. Looking at their possible lineup, I want to say right off the bat that Arsenal could line up in pretty much any way. I think they'll play a very specific formation, which is the one that they usually use, which is the 4-3-3, which changes when in possession. But in terms of who will start for them, they've got quite a strong squad these days, and there's many different ways that they could go. They play in Europe right now, which might mean that they rotate a lot of players. And honestly, given that we're a team sort of struggling to stay up this season, it would make sense if they do heavy rotation. But at the same time, given that they had that disappointment at the Etihad, they might be out for blood and they might want to go for a strong team. What I think we might well see, though, is Ethan Nwaneri playing, who hasn't even got his picture here on Lineup Builder, but he played midweek and did really well. He's only 17 years old, but looks like another one of the Arsenal superstars from their academy. In front of him, you've got Bukayo Saka, who is someone who came through the academy himself and someone who we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But otherwise, they've got a really strong team. Trossard always impresses. That could be Martinelli if he doesn't play. Declan Rice cost 100 million. So they've got quality all over the park, a really strong defense, and they're a super strong team. Now, the interesting thing about Arsenal is even though they normally start in this 4-3-3, actually, as the game progresses, they move to this shape, which is the 3-2-5 shape, if you want to call it 3-2-2-3. And it's a shape that should be very familiar to you. In fact, the way that they play should be very familiar to you, because this is very similar to what Enzo Maresca did when he was here. Although I would say Arsenal have taken this concept and gone with it a little bit further. But what they'll tend to do is when they're in possession, one of their players will invert and play next to Thomas. Now, I've put this as being Calafiori, who is someone that they've signed over the summer, but it might not be him. It could be Julian Timber. It might be actually that Calafiori doesn't even start, and Zinchenko, who is the guy that mainly did this for them over the last few seasons, steps in and inverts instead. Could be Jakob Kiwior. That's someone who they've tried as well. But in general, that's how they will play, and they'll keep this kind of 5 shape. And in fact, one of the things that's really interesting about Arsenal, and this was interesting for me when Enzo Maresca came into the team, is like the same sort of patterns and structured attack sequences that we often did under Enzo Maresca, you'll see Arsenal do them. In fact, they do them a bit better because they've had the team for longer and they've got higher quality players. But they're really good at having this consistent chance creation, making these well-rehearsed routines, and that means that they get the best out of them. And it means that any one of that front 5 is a threat, and sometimes even more than that, given that Calafiori scored an absolute screamer against Man City last week. The really cool thing about Arsenal is just how fluid they are. So one thing that I'll talk about this lineup, which I think is perhaps the unique thing and the take that Arteta's got that other managers in the Premier League don't have right now, is that many players that he signed are players that can play multiple positions. So let's take Declan Rice, for example. Declan Rice actually can play as a centre-back, believe it or not. He has played some games in that position. He started life off at Arsenal as a central defensive midfielder. Now he's playing more box-to-box and maybe even more as a box crusher. So this means that he can fill in different positions during the game. And that's something that they really like to do. And I'll show you some examples of that. Kai Havertz, Is he a striker? Well, not really. He's a false nine. So sometimes he does his best work actually as an attacking midfielder or even drifting out to the wing. And it gives them a lot of versatility. Yuri and Timber, it seems, can play pretty much any single position on the pitch, which is kind of crazy. So this means that all these players will rotate around, and that can drag people out of space and make different slots for them to play in. So here's an example of some of Arsenal's fluidity. So you can see they've got the 3-2 shape here in defence. But what we can see is Odegaard, who fortunately for us is actually injured this weekend and out for a little while, it seems. He's actually drifted all the way back to give them another option and to drag players around and make an alternative box midfield that they can work with. And here's another example where it's slightly different game, but a similar example that Odegaard's dropped deep to help in the build-up. But Arsenal still got this four-man box midfield. What's happened instead is that Ben White, who actually started in this sort of position in the back three, is actually pushed up now to become part of he's actually playing as an attacking midfielder here. So essentially he's swapped with Odegaard. And this is like really tricky for oppositions to deal with, because who do you mark? If you follow your man, you might get taken out of space. Someone's going to be running in to vacate the space. To get this level of coaching is really, really impressive from Arteta, because when people step out and move positions, whilst it makes space, it means that if you get caught out on transition, there's going to be holes all over the place. But this is something that Arsenal are really, really good at. And I think it makes them quite unique. I think they actually do this even more than Man City. I think that man for man, they don't have as good players as some of the really elite teams in Europe. So that would specifically be Manchester City and Real Madrid. But I think in terms of the way that they play as a collective, you could make an argument that they're right up there and maybe only ever slightly behind Man City. And Man City do have Haaland, who really gives them a bit of a cheat code to get through. Because if you look at who you'd rather have up front, Erling Haaland or Kai Havertz, I think this Arsenal team of Erling Haaland will probably be better than Man City. Here's another example of their fluidity. So this is one of their attacking midfielders who's actually started by drifting out to the left-hand side and then bent his run in from around to get in behind. And this is really, really difficult for teams to deal with, because you might be thinking that this player will be playing here centrally, but because he's drifted out, he's kind of vacated space. There's actually a player here who's completely free, who is marking the space rather than the man, and he's ghosted in now to get into this position. And this run's actually been extremely difficult for teams to pick up because they're not quite sure what to do. They don't want to get dragged around by the fluid rotations. And there's a really good example of how they're able to create spaces out of nowhere. Here's another player that's worth talking about. I believe he is available for this weekend, Leandro Trossard, even though he got sent off against Man City. I think the cup game midweek counted as part of his domestic ban, so he's able to play. And yeah, at the start of this sequence, look at the position he plays. Whilst he normally starts as a winger, he's actually drifted inside. Odegaard's here on the other side with one of the centre-backs who's drifted out to this side. So now he's started in this attacking midfield position, and now he's made his great run through, and Odegaard's going to find him. And basically, he got away with that because he's managed to lose his markers or the people that were looking after him. And now he's got free reign to get him behind. And here you can see he receives the ball in a really dangerous position. Havertz with his physicality is someone he can aim for. And you can bet that Bukayo Saka is going to be running in from this other side. So it means he's always going to know who he can pass to. Cutbacks, lofted crosses to the far post, maybe cutting in and having a shot himself. There's many different ways they could go. And they managed to engineer this chance through really good systems, through patterns of play and triangles. Here's another example. This time it's Zinchenko, the inverted fullback on the ball. And this is a position he will take up if he plays. So he's part of a double pivot. And this time the winger has actually come onto this side. So this is the sort of run that they make often. Play the ball in between to the half spaces. And you've got someone who's going to be isolated one-on-one if a defender can get back or cut in and have a shot. So I could go on and on about Arsenal, given that they're one of the top teams in the country. There's plenty out there, and you know that every time they're going to be on TV, they're going to get at least half an hour of people covering them. But they are a really good team, and you've got to say that Mikel Arteta, whether you like him or find him annoying, he's proving himself to be one of the top coaches in Europe right now. Right, speaking of who I think the threat is, my slide didn't come up, but basically it's Bukayo Saka, the star boy. So Saka is someone who I don't think actually gets enough praise in England. Look at his stats here. He's just 23 years old, and look in terms of percentiles where he ranks. This is absolutely elite. This is crazy. Honestly, this is a world-class potential player. That's an English player that's already got us to 2 European finals and unlucky not to win one of them. And he's only going to improve. I still think in his position in the Premier League, Mo Salah is the better player. But once Salah goes, it will be Saka who's going to be the dominant left-footed right winger in the division. He's playing absolutely brilliantly, and he's going to be up against Victor Christensen. Now, Christensen didn't do so badly in the Euros when England played Denmark, but the England system at the time was really poor with Southgate in charge. This is a whole different story when you've got Mikel Arteta and the fluidity of Arsenal. And I think Victor's in for a tough time at the office against Saka. Will Cooper consider moving Justin over to try and deal with Saka? That's something I would suggest, but he ain't going to do it. He's going to stick Christensen on it, and it could be a tough day at the office for him. So speaking of Mr. Cooper himself, what's he going to do? He's under a bit of pressure now. Although we're not in the relegation zone, and although we are through to last 16 in the Cup, it's fair to say that recent performances, in fact, all of our performances have been pretty underwhelming, and we haven't got the best results so far. But what I did want to bring up to you guys is to show you that actually his record against the sort of elite teams, and those elite teams I'm going to consider to be Manchester City, Liverpool, even though they might not be as good this season as they were a few seasons ago, and Arsenal. And when Cooper first arrived in the Premier League with Forest, they did get battered quite a few times. But their recent result, what you're going to see a recurring theme here, is that in general, the score lines are pretty close. And in fact, he managed to beat Arsenal with 1-0 victory last year. And he even managed to beat Liverpool at the start of his reign as well. And he's got a draw at the City ground against Man City. And you can see that here, the biggest scoreline was 3-0 to Liverpool. But otherwise, there's a 3-2 here, 1-0, 2-0. He's managed to keep the score down and therefore make the game competitive. So that's actually quite impressive, you would say, because if you look at, let's say, Vincent Kompany from Burnley last season, Burnley got tonked quite a few times against the top teams. So how's he managed to achieve that? Well, here's my preview for what I think the match is going to be. It is parking the bus. I think this is what Cooper's going to do. And to be honest with you, maybe it's the right thing to do, because when there's a big gulf in terms of technical capabilities between the teams and the fluency that the teams have got, you know, if you're going to try and match them with an attacking style, you might be in trouble. Here's what happened the last time that Forest beat Arsenal when Cooper was in charge. And you can see, was he in charge? Maybe it was Nuno in charge, but whoever was in charge here, they had just 18% possession. Arsenal had 82%. But despite having all of that possession, you can see that, Nottingham Forest still won the game. So that was an impressive result from them. And it showed you what is possible, if you're a very defensive unit. And so I guess what I'm saying is I think we're going to see a game very similar to this. I think there's going to be heavy possession for Arsenal. Doesn't mean we'll get something, but it means we'll try and make it as difficult for them as possible. And look, we've got to say that Arsenal themselves last week against Manchester City, after they had the man sent off, they themselves didn't try to score anything in the second half, and they just completely tried to shut out Man City, and they almost got away with it. Here's another example. This was when Forest beat Liverpool when Cooper was in charge. Again, you can see Liverpool had over 75% possession, all these extra passes, more shots, but Forest won 1-0. And to be fair, shots on target was the same for both teams. So they definitely carried a threat on transition. So that's the sort of thing that we can expect to see. So how do I think we're going to achieve this? I think most likely we're going to line up in a 5-4-1. So I actually think this might be the first time this season where we have 3 centre-backs starting. And I think we'll only really have 2 attacking players. And I think it's going to be Steffi Mavididi and Vardy. And this sort of formation might look weird, but what I think will happen is that when we're defending, even Mavididi will be narrow. But when we try and break, because he's got pace and skill, he might be the one that tries to join Vardy up top. Vardy's going to cut a very isolate figure in this game. He's not going to see much of the ball. It's going to be a lot of thankless tasks running for a ball that doesn't really end up at his feet too often. But he's used to that playing for Leicester. We won the title with him playing like that. So he knows what he's got to do. And it'll be a solid back 5. And if you think about it, we tried something very similar to this against Crystal Palace to see out the last 5 to 10 minutes. That's why I suspect it is something that we'll bring up again. In that game, what happened is Mavididi came off, and it was for Fatawu and Vardy playing up top. And actually, we brought on Hamza Chowdhury, I think it was for Skip near the end, to try and help see us out. So we've got lots of options that we could use if we try to play this way. Right. What I want to bring up right now, though, is that even though we played this way, there is actually another way that Cooper could go. Do I think he'll go this way? No, I don't. But I think it's something that might work. And I actually think we have the players to try something like this. So I'm going to bring up Atalanta here. So Arsenal so far this season, I believe, are unbeaten, which is really good for them. But they should have lost the game. They played Atalanta away in the Champions League, and Atalanta had a penalty that was saved. And they made really, really good chances, and they caused them a lot of problems, which is unsurprising because Atalanta are the current Europa League champions. How did they do this? Well, their manager is Gianpiero Gasperini, and his speciality is man-to-man pressing. And if you cast your mind back to last season, this is something that on occasion caused us problems. Quite early on, we played Huddersfield away, and Neil Warnock was in charge of Huddersfield at the time. And what he did is, rather than parking the bus, he actually decided to deploy his team in a man-for-man marking system against us. And it made life really difficult. And I actually think that if they had better players, they would have won that game. And basically, we beat them by relying on quality rather than a system. And it took us a little while to understand how to play against such systems. So here's some examples from that game. And you can see that, look, they get really physical conflict, really getting in their faces. And you can see how many players, look here, is a really good example of just how tight they are. There are the occasional player that will break free, and that is possibly the risk in playing a system like this. But in general, what you do is you're breaking the game rather than it being about system versus system, is you're making it about individual battles. And you're backing that your team, because you're going to be more up for the fight, because you've got bigger battlers, that you can kind of beat quality in some ways by winning these individual duels. And if you can do that early and really set out your stall and annoy people, you can really get into people's faces and disrupt their rhythm. And I mean, all those beautiful passing triangles that they try to play, well, they'll start to struggle a lot more because they're unable to really make the spaces and they're getting dragged around themselves. Here's a kind of example of what it would look like on the pitch under Atalanta. This wasn't against Arsenal, but this is how they played against Milan a few seasons ago. And you can see as well how every single player in red is basically shadowed by someone in blue at all times, no matter where they go on the pitch. So if the 7 here went all the way to the other side, the number 2 is going to follow him. That's how you play. And like I say, that just means it comes down to the individual duels. So why is that something that I think we could do? The reason I think we could do this is, here's a system that we could also play. And I don't particularly like it. But one thing that Cooper has done since coming to Leicester is he has favoured these players that are very hardworking, very physically combative, and ones that are really good at making tackles and interceptions. Jordan Ayew, I think, being the exemplification of that idea. But he's not the only one. Indeed, he's really good at doing this. Bobby de Cordova-Reid, he actually had a really good performance against Arsenal with Marco Silva. They didn't go man-for-man pressing, but they got in their faces, showing that he could do it. Many players in our team could do this. Justin's good at doing that. Christensen's good at doing this. Okoli actually came from Atalanta. So he, trust me, knows how to play man-to-man marking. Fast the same. Skip and Winks, look, I still think that they can do it. It's not going to be difficult for them to pick up something like that. So here would be my alternate lineup. And it would be the same sort of 4-2-3-1 that we play normally, but we could go man-for-man marking. Now, will we do that? I don't know. Perhaps maybe the most likely outcome of all is we play 4-2-3-1 like we do always, and we don't go man-for-man, but we still try and sit in the block. But I feel if we are going to be sitting in a block, it probably would make more sense to go for the 5-4-1. So, look, I don't think Steve Cooper is a very brave manager, but it'd be something that I would be curious to see if it could work. And, you know, sometimes these teams that get good results against the top teams, they do it by shocking them, by doing something that they wouldn't expect. So that's my sort of like, I guess, conspiracy theory that maybe Cooper's going to be brave enough to try and go man for man against Arsenal. Right, on to match predictions. This is quite a short preview, kind of for obvious reasons. This is a free hit, as cliche as it sounds, and it's our turn to park the bus. We're not going to have much of the ball. Chances are going to be few and far between. I think we will get chances, though, because I think that no matter how good a team you're playing against, because they're going to have to push so many people up, there will always just be that one time where there's a mistake or a ball over the top and you get a half chance to score. It might not be much better than that, but it probably will be something like that. I also think because we have actually seen this in action already against Palace, where we tried to see out the game, that he might have been trying that out and he might have had that in the back of his mind in terms of how we're going to play. One thing I will say, and another reason why I think we will be parking the bus, is that Arsenal, without Odegaard, who I think got injured in that Atalanta game, they have looked a lot less creative. Now, don't get me wrong, they've still got amazing players, and with their systems, they can make a lot of chances. But for me, I don't think it's a surprise that since Martin Odegaard came into the Arsenal team, they went from being sort of between 5th and 7th to pushing right the way up to challenging for the title. I think he's that good. Obviously, he signed for Real Madrid as a 16-year-old, couldn't break in because he had Modric and Kroos ahead of him. But he is a top player and one of the best central attacking midfielders in the Premier League. So them missing him is great for us. And they, in fact, signed Mikel Merino. He's a Spanish international who was really good in the Euros. But he's injured as well. So that's 2 players they've got out. And if they play Rice in that position, he's good, but he's nowhere near as creative as Odegaard. And in a game where it's going to be a deep block, maybe that gives us some semblance of a chance. We shall see. We're going to be in a deep block for most of the game. We're going to make it hard for Arsenal. think Cooper's often only used 2 attacking players when playing this way in the past, just looking for transitions. So don't be surprised if it goes that way. And as I said here, we could go man for man, but I don't really expect it. I think he's just too brave and too out there for Cooper. I tried to see my research if he did do it in any other games. As far as I could see, he didn't, but who knows? Maybe he has done it in the past. So you put all that into context, and I think it's going to be a pretty routine win for Arsenal. I don't think they'll batter us because I think we will make it difficult. I even think there's a possibility that we can see it out till 60, 70, even 80 minutes at 0-0. But eventually they'll get the goal, and then they'll probably get another one when we try and push up to get something from it. And look, I don't think they got bigger fish to fry than Leicester, let's be honest with you. So I don't think they're going to have anything, trying to destroy us. At least I hope not. And I think given what we are, we'll just try and make it tight. And, we know that our season is not going to be defined by this game. Sadly, where the season is going to be defined is in the game that we had previous against Everton. And after this, we've got Bournemouth. So that's it. That's for the preview. Faster one today. I don't think there's too much I really need to say about this. The Man City one's probably going to look quite similar to this. Let's see in the post-match analysis if there's anything interesting that Cooper did. But otherwise, thank you very much. Let's see if we can get something from the Emirates. And come on, you Foxes. Up to Leicester.